Good afternoon. Welcome to the Spirit Out of the Bottle Building Talks. This is actually a collaboration of the BOUW Campus and Geest together. Today we have Professor Alfons van Marrewijk. And the aim of the Building Talks is to exchange ideas multi-generational with interested parties within and outside of the construction sector about what the corona crisis means for construction and what should it look like when we start working normal again. Or does it bring innovation that will help the much needed transition, not only for us, but also, or perhaps especially for future unborn generations. As discussed today, we have the Building Talks from Prof.dr.ing Alfons van Marrewijk, who was born in 1960, which makes him a Generation X. Alfons works as an expert consultant in organizational change and inter-organizational collaborations, which is just a small part of what he actually does. But if I have to do the introduction, what he all does, it will be too long and he won't be able to give his presentations, I think. So his topic today is anchoring innovation and new work behavior of projects in modern organizations. According to Alfons, this theme is relevant to the construction sector because we regularly see innovative projects who doesn't make it to realization or has, as he says, die of a soft death. An observation also relevant for the transition to the circular construction economy, who we are working on now at this moment. Additional to his speech, each participant will receive Alfons his paper, and for people who look at this later, if you send us a mail, we also will send this paper, and this paper is called Digging for Change and Resistance in Inter-Organizational Projects in the Utility Sector. That's all for me. The word is to Alfons. Alfons, I'm happy to listen to you. Thank you.
Okay, Maurice, thank you for the introduction. And today's talk will be in English, as you announced, as we use it also recording for teaching purposes. And the talk is about, especially the topic which you address, is how temporary innovations or innovations in a temporary setting like projects, how they actually can be embedded in the more permanent organizations. And that's actually what we call multi-level change. I will introduce to you, well, let's start with the agenda. I will first introduce you to a new project that we actually just started a month ago about the changing behavior in circular construction projects. I do this project together with my colleagues from the TU Delft, Hans van Marrewijk and Ellen van Buren. It's an NWO project, meaning that PhDs are involved with it. I will explain that transition and behavior is a multi-level process of micro level, individual behavior like we are doing now in the corona crisis. Actually, we are completely changing our habits and our way of working and all things, but there's also a measure level, so this organizational level, and on macro level, which is more the institutional level on institutional level. So what we try to prevent is that these innovative projects actually isolate themselves from the more permanent organizations. And that's a third topic that I address. And actually, I come back to you, readers and listeners, to the question: well, how can we actually connect these innovative projects in which very interesting new behavior is taking place towards the more permanent organizations and make it a real transition? This is a really difficult question and full focus of our new research, but also I want to listen to practitioners and to others involved, well, what their opinion is. So let's first start with this idea of transition towards a circular construction economy. I think for most of you not unfamiliar that the construction sector is a large CO2 and waste producer, and that we see lots of ambition and technology possible for making circular processes. We see them, but also what we see is that the ambitions are high, but during the execution of the project, we see that the daily reality of collaboration and of practices that both the constructor but also the architects have difficulties to fulfill the ambitions of this circularity. And we see that actually all of the clients, architect, the whole chain, new behaviors and new roles are actually being needed. And this is where change and human behavior comes in. There we see that we need new practices of people in the chain towards actually this new way of working. We know that in construction processes, practices are very old, are very much embedded in a history and not easy to change. And especially making this from a small scale, small projects into a more large economy, a transition. That's a big question that that we think that is really needed to be addressed. So what we see is that if there is a new situation, you can either adapt, you can look from it from a possibility of making changes or adapting to the new system. But we also see that for many people, reflection is not very easy. I mean, you are not becoming a constructor because you want to be very reflexive on your working practices. No, you want to construct something, you want to design something. And so this is where reflection and change is coming into a sector that is not very used to to this kind of practices. So the aim of our study is actually to learn to reflect and learn from behavioral intervention. So what we're actually trying to do in this real-time construction project, we're trying to make people really aware of what are you doing. So why are you doing what you're doing? So if an architect is designing a building and he is used to do it in a way of using new materials or experiment with materials, and the practice is that he is not actually including others or the suppliers of secondary materials or refurbished materials, then we would like to ask him, hey, what happens if we take the chain into the design phase, and what kind of practices come out from there, and if they work, how can they be helpful for other projects, so that you learn from project to next project. And this is something that we are going to do. We call this action research. So within the design phase of circular construction projects, we're really going to be close on the daily practices of these kind of projects, and trying to make it to a more, helping to supporting the transition towards a circular economy. We do that by together with a platform called CircleStat, and this is a group of organizations, a chain, actually looking at a new exploratory projects that have the focus to come up with new innovations and new practices within the constellation of construction circular buildings. We have the very large public clients in our consortium, Rijksvastgoedbedrijf, the 4 big cities in the Netherlands, but also Rijkswaterstaat, Bouw Nederland, leading architects in designing firms and major construction firms. So it's a huge, big consortium that all very willing to actually learn and change their way of working in that chain. And we do so, and this is actually a role of researchers that is not very common, and we call it engaged scholarship. Well, maybe at the technical university it's more used than at the university I'm working with, at the Vrije University. It is that you are actually really listening, not so much trying to be from a large distance, looking at the projects and come in with interviews. No, but really being engaged in terms of participating in the projects, helping to reflect on a very regular basis. What have we found? What are the practices that we see? What kind of rituals, what kind of mechanisms and collaboration do we see? And what does it mean for the way that this construction chain works together? And where can we see improvements? This costs actually lots of energy from the PhD students and the postdoc student and the supervisors like we are. But it's also very, very satisfactory, because we are dealing with a wicked problem that you cannot solve at your own or by one organization. So it is something that you really are involved very actually. So we do this by behavioral interventions. That's our sales. Now we start with, and this is something that we do not start with macro interventions, but we start micro level, start very close to the daily practice of employees, helping them to reflect, because every employee, and this is what we write and we know from literature, every employee is a change agent. Like we overnight, we changed our habits of working at offices and all are now working at home. We changed our way of meeting other people overnight. We changed our way of shopping. This was an incredible intervention in our way of living, and we could do it. We did it. We saw people moving different, walking different in the streets, going different to the shops. So this is something that can be really powerful if you know why you're doing it differently and what the reason is why you should work differently or behave differently. So here is what we think. This is coming from literature on that we understand organizations that they can change every day. That this is a micro perspective of change, because every day you reflect upon what you're doing. Of course, there are routines, but you can reflect upon and think, okay, this is what I'm going to do differently tomorrow. And this makes this very powerful way of looking at this micro level interventions. And here comes the big issue. I've done this for many years already, and sometimes very successfully, but always on the micro project level. And we know that in order to go for real transition, we need a more multi-level and multi-authored. So multi-level is this micro, meso, or macro level, but multi-authored is also that not only the people, not only the architects, or only the clients or constructors, but it's the whole line, the whole chain of construction, circular construction, that needed to be part of it. And we know by now that we have looked very, in a very, I would say, black and white picture, dichotomous perspective on resistance and change. We thought that, people that are resisting are wrong and people that are change are good. But it's very much more integral part of it, that if you are changing, and we see this now also with the Corona crisis, that resisting is also a way of, you wanted to look in a different way. We have, you can have a different opinion about the change process. And that might even be, well, not so bad for the change process. Engagement in the change process is much better than distancing yourself, keeping yourself very far away. So we think that resistance should be part of the integral of change. So we should not be too afraid of resistance. Actually, we have studied the process of innovation over many years already, and what we have learned that successful innovative projects, and now comes the very difficult term of success. What is a success to you? So people that perceive themselves to be working in successful projects, innovative projects, we have our study showed, and we found, actually we followed 2 innovative projects. And here is where I think you can follow this by this line. So there was one part is that the integration of the project in the parent organization. So how autonomous is the innovation project in relation to the mother organization? So that was the one line, and the other line was the different project phases, starting from starting from design, construction towards implementation of a phase. And we looked at 2 different projects. The one was we call Beating Heart. It's actually a development project in the city. Actually, it's in Rotterdam. And the other was the Rail Nerve Center. It's actually a ProRail, and it was the design of a new control center in Utrecht. And funnily enough, one project, the ProRail project, started as an isolated project. And if I mean isolated, I really mean isolated, hidden from this organization, with a budget that nobody really knew. They were actually hiding away because they wanted to starting low profile and then come up with a new intervention and really innovative, control room. The other one, the Beating Heart project in Rotterdam, started very embedded. It was a public-private partnership project, and they wanted to learn a lot from it. But what we saw that in both projects, there were what we have called symbolic, discursive, and spatial practices. I will explain what they are. They actually pushed both projects towards isolation. So meaning that if you are making your own logo, having your own office far away from the mother organization, talking about yourself as being, we are doing something very special here, a kind of fighting spirit mentality, that you actually doing so, you isolate yourself from the mother organizations or the partner organization or stakeholders in such a way that others are perceiving you not as a successful, innovative project, but actually as an arrogant pricks, as hey, this guy thinking that they can do the best. And they actually distancing themselves in such a way that all of the innovations found in the project actually end up being isolated in the project and not being taken over by the mother organizations. We have seen examples of this, for example, by the high-speed line, ASL Zuid, which had become a more isolated project, and intervention had been done to embed it again in a larger, with ProRail and with Rijkswaterstaat. We've seen it bij Hooggelegen in Utrecht. This was a project that was more or less isolated. So there is always a danger of innovative projects that they become isolated. And this is something that we really try to prevent in this project of becoming towards a circular economy. And actually, and this is also where I'm very, very curious about. So, okay, we know that these mechanisms work. We actually published a paper about this in the International Journal of Project Management. We have seen these examples in many other projects in the Netherlands. But how can you actually embed these innovative projects in the larger stakeholder environment? Because if you do so, and I've done this with other projects before, then the risk is that the mother organizations take control over the project. The project needs some kind of autonomy enough to be able, to do your thing, to experiment. And if your experimentation is actually limited because of the procedures of the organization, because of the goals of the organization, or because they needed, employees from your project, or prohibited your employees to participate in your project, then you also cannot reach this innovation that you really wanted to do so. And so this balance between autonomy and embeddedness is something which I think really, really difficult, but needed, especially in this, as this transition is a multi-level process. And so we mean that we need not only this micro level change, but we need to influence this on this different levels, or this on a meso level, meaning it should be included in organizations. So new findings over, for example, collaboration between the architect and the constructor and the circular materials, that should also become practice within the companies themselves. And at a more macro level, it should be in the tender procedures or in a law or in, so really institutionalized, what we call it. So this so we have multi-level sources of change. And I've made mistakes before that I was really focused upon the micro level and upon the, say, the macro level, influencing the board of directors and influencing the employees, and then forgetting the middle management, which have a very important stake in the success of the implementation of innovations. And so actually what we're trying to do is connect, and there is a lot of literature on, well, you know, temporary organizations or projects and how they can support change in a more institutional level. This is something, and we call this multi-project lineage ecosystems. It's a difficult word for it, but actually it means that you use different projects not as isolated learning environments, but actually the lineage of the different projects are an ecosystem at itself. And this is something I have confidence in it, that if you really focus upon learning and bring it from one project to another, influencing what have we learned from it and how to bring it to the next one, and that you then come up with a substantial change. And so this brings us actually to the question that I really am curious about your thoughts. How can we then come up, how can we prevent this pitfall, the pitfall of isolation? If you are a really successful, innovative project, how do you prevent that you identify yourself so much with your innovation that you forget to connect others in your project? That's one. And how can we connect this kind of projects into the more permanent organizations, that we end up with changing also the different levels which are needed for the transition towards a circular economy. This is so this is the question I would like to address to you, and we can discuss this in Dutch. That makes it a little bit more easier, I guess, for the discussion. Thank you, and until now.
Thank you very much for this inspiring talk, Alfons. And we are going to the questions now.